let's get growing. We're out here on the patio. It's a beautiful morning. We are the 1st of September today, I believe, so we need to start thinking about saving our summer. We got a lot of time left in the garden, so I don't want you to feel that, now that the calendar's switched over to another month, that, the garden season is over. We've got easily 2 months left of gardening season, maybe even 3 if the weather cooperates with us. But we have a job that we need to start thinking about now while it's still warm and beautiful out, and that is saving the plants that we want to keep to use next year. We'd all love to bring in full pots of things and the trees we made, but we always don't have room for all of that. So we've got to think about a couple of strategies to save the plants we want to keep to use again for next year, and and do some propagating on those. Decide where you've got a plant that you have to keep. Fine, make room for it. Like our fuchsia standard that we created this year. We did this on a few shows. We've seen it. If you look back in our archives, you'll see where we created this fuchsia standard in this season. You'll definitely want to keep that over. So right now he's going to stay outside and we're going to let it keep growing. But let's say you want to use this fuchsia variety more next year in some other containers and things like that. So this is the time when you need to start thinking about it. Late August into the first 2 weeks of September, at not at the latest, but it's sort of the optimum time. Weather's still nice. The nights are still relatively warm. Things are growing right now like crazy. They're in active growth, and this is the time to start thinking about what plants you want to take cuttings from and to get those cuttings done. If you wait until you get a frost warning sometime in October and then run out and say, oh, I got to get some geranium cuttings done, or I got to get my coleus cuttings done, the plants go into a different mode of growth at those time of the years, and they're starting to shut down, especially when the nights start to get cool every night and the days start to get cool. The days get really short. All those factors sort of turn plants off into really active growth. So now is a great time to get those cuttings done. So go around your containers, go around the garden, look at what specialty annuals you've got. Did you have a begonia that you thought was fantastic? Did you have a coleus that you can't live without? A beautiful lantana. This one here matches our containers great, so I love it. So we're going to use it again next year. So now's the time to start thinking about taking some cuttings from these and building up some plants for next year. So you don't have to actually, sort of wreck the plants to take cuttings. You don't need to wreck the look of them. Go in and look at some of these inner shoots here. We've got a branch here. I can probably take this out, not make any difference. So I'm going to cut back to just above a node, just above where the leaves come out of the stem. And that gives me a nice piece to start with. That's about 5 to 6 inches long. Now that's too long for a cutting in most cases, but it gives us a good place to start. So we're going to look back on this cutting. We see we have some spent flowers that should have been deadheaded off, and we see several nodes. So we'll look at this cutting and we'll go up to, let's go to this node here. You're going to cut just below a node, so just below where the leaves attach to the stem. That's called the node. It's a very important spot on a plant. That is where leaves come from. That is where flowers come from. New stems come from there. And also on most plants, new roots will come from there. So we can take those 2 bottom leaves, pop them off. We'll take off the 2 seed heads. If they pop off easily, great. If not, trim them off with scissors, or a sharp X-Acto knife works really, really well. Also, what you want to do is you want to watch flowering. Now, on some plants, this stem would have ended in a flower. It's called a terminal bud. When you're doing those plants, you want to look for shoots that don't have a terminal bud on them. But lantanas bloom from the side. So we're just going to go in and we're going to remove any flower buds that are there. And in fact, probably on this one, we can even remove this very tiny little growing tip, because it's full of flower buds as well. And it's not going to hurt anything if we remove it. What's going to happen is the plant is going to root from these nodes. It's going to grow new stems from these nodes. So there we go. There's our first prepared cutting right there. Very, very easy. We've got 2 nodes to deal with. That's where the roots are going to come from. And then we've got 4 leaves. And in fact, most plants, most cuttings fail when they lose water too quickly. So you can even take a leaf like these ones and even reduce them in size. That doesn't hurt the plant. All it does is it makes the cutting work a little less hard to support those leaves. So we've got that. We've got some prepared 2.5-inch pots of soilless mix. We're going to use those. We're going to take some rooting powder, some rooting hormone, and we're going to put that into a separate container. Never, ever, ever dip your cuttings into the rooting hormone container. You don't want to contaminate what's in there. So we're going to take some rooting powder. We're going to put a little bit into our cup. There we go. Seal the cup back up. What you want to do, if you've been using rooting powder and if you've had it for a long time, check the bottle before you use it. Make sure it hasn't long expired. It does lose its efficiency like other things if you get past, long past the best before date or expiry date. So keep an eye on that. You can use powder rooting hormones. You can get them in liquid form as well. So we've got our little bit of rooting powder here. We've got our cutting. And what we're going to do is we're going to coat this bottom node in rooting powder. So we just dip it in there. So then we got rooting powder on here, but you don't want to put too much. So we're going to knock that off, knock the excess off, and there's just a very, very light dusting. Rooting hormone really can help until you get too much of it. You get too much of it, and it works in reverse. It impedes. The other thing rooting hormones can do is they can act like a bit of a fungicide and protect the bottom end of your cutting from fungus attack. So they do sort of a double job. Then you want to get a pencil or a dibbler or a chopstick or something, and you make a hole in your potting soil. Never just take your cutting and jam it in the soil. Make a little hole. It's called dibbling. So dibble a little hole, put your cutting in, and then gently firm it around. So you have that. Now, for our uses, we always do 1 per pot. You could, in a pot this size, you could put 4 cuttings in there and then be prepared to transplant them when they fully rooted. But that's as simple as it gets. That's easy to do. And you can do it on all sorts of things. We've got coleus, we've got potato vines, we've got lantanas, we've got bideg, all sorts of stuff here to do. So we're going to do it one more time, a little bit quicker. I'm going to take a little snippet of a coleus. I'll take this stem here, cut it way back. You won't notice I've taken it off. Now, coleus are an interesting plant because they're exceptionally easy to root. So what you can do with the coleus is you can root at the nodes, or you can even root in between the nodes, because roots will form off the stem. Many of sort of that mint family will root off the stem. and be quite easy to root. Also, what you could do is, if you're short of cuttings, if you've got a plant that you love but it's not doing so well and you've only got 1 or 2 stems, you can actually do multiple cuttings of a coleus off the same stem. So that's what we'll do here. So we're going to cut just below a node. We're going to pop those leaves off. The new shoots that are there are easy enough to pull because they're small. And then we're going to go up to the next node, and we're just going to cut off a little bit above that node. So what we have is this. These leaves are really big. We're going to cut those off. Because coleus are so easy, we could do this. We're going to get some rooting hormone on there. We're going to tap off the excess. We're going to dibble. We're going to stick our cutting in quite deep, so that just sort of where the leaves meet on this node are at the soil surface. If you take a cutting and you stick it in like this, what's going to happen is, if it gets a little dry, if it wilts after you've taken the cutting, you run the risk of bending this whole stem and breaking it or stopping the water flow up to the leaves. So make sure when you dibble down deep, put the cutting in, firm soil around. Very simple. But we've also now got this shoot, and it's big enough to do the same thing again. So we're going to cut below the leaves. We're going to take those 2 leaves off. We're going to snip off those. We get a lot of leaves here still, so we're going to take these big leaves off. Even going to take off those bottom ones there. Get those trimmed close. We've still got a couple of leaves that are too big. There's a primo coleus cutting right there. Be rooting hormone. Clean it off. Dibble. Get it firm down as deep as we can. Cutting's a bit big. There we go. Very easy to do. Now, things like coleus are very easy. They could actually even be done in a glass of water. Prepare them exactly the same way. Put them in water and they'll actually root. So we're going to look at another way of doing cuttings for a few different varieties. We got this beautiful Marengo ivy here. We planted these in this window box in April when we did our spring plantings. They had been in the window box the entire season, and they're going to stay there for the fall. When you've got plants that are nearly hardy, or hardy that you're using in a container, you can do that. We're going to get 3 seasons out of this Marengo ivy, but it's going to stay outside until it freezes dead. So what we want to do is save some cuttings of the ivy so we can use it again next year. So what we're going to look at, we're going to look for a good long vigorous shoot. Get this one right here. We're going to cut it back just above a node so we don't leave an ugly stem. And with an ivy, you can do what is called a single node cutting. Everything is going to come from here on this ivy. You can actually even see there's a tiny little bump just opposite the leaf on the stem. That is a root waiting to grow. So what you can do with ivies, this stem is going to give us a lot of cuttings. So we've got a little stem here. We're going to cut just above that leaf. And then we're going to look up the plant here. And we're going to see we get another leaf with a node. We're going to cut just above that. That long stem and a leaf. We're going to cut just above that. And we're just going to continue all the way up this stem. Still nice and firm, but not too overgrown. We could probably get one more out of there. That little flimsy part may or may not root, so we won't use that. But what we've got now is we've got a piece of stem, a leaf, a node. There's a little bud sitting in there for a new stem. And this one doesn't quite have it yet, but Right over here, there's going to be a little root that grows. This is called an internodal cutting because we're using the stem between two nodes. We don't have a node at the bottom, but ivy will root this way, clematis will root this way, a lot of vining plants will root this way. So what I normally do with these is I normally gather up 3 or 4, get them all kind of matching, about the same height, and bundle them up so the nodes are all at about the same level. Now, you can't do much with the rooting hormone with these, but if you want to give those cut ends a little dip, you're not going to hurt anything. So then I take those 3 cuttings and find my pencil. Then I'm going to dibble a hole, and I'm going to put those 3 cuttings all the way in so the nodes of that single node that's there are all right at soil surface or even slightly below. And then what's going to happen is they're going to root off the stem and they're going to grow a new plant. If you buy an ivy at the garden center and take it apart, you will see that a 4-inch pot of ivy probably has 10 of these in there. And the growers do that, so as soon as 10 of them root and 10 of them send out a shoot, they've got a saleable plant. So you can do exactly the same thing. You don't need to do individuals of ivies when you do your cuttings. You can do a group of them. Once you've got your cuttings done, then you got to water them in. Very, very important. You're going to water them in gently. Because they've got to have moisture. They cannot dry out. But conversely, they cannot be kept too wet. So we've got them watered in well. We're going to get a humidity tray. Don't worry that it's yellowed and old. This is still in good shape. We put the humidity tray over, and then we take this and we keep it outside, because it doesn't need to be in the house yet, but put it into a shady spot where the hot afternoon sun is not going to get it really hot. If you have good covers, they'll have vents on them. They'll have vents on them here so you can let some of the hot air out, but you want to keep them more or less closed so that you build up quite high humidity in there, because it's the combination of bright light, good humidity, moist soil, good temperatures is all going to provide the optimum rooting situation for the cuttings. Okay? Now, one more little group, and that's succulents. If Laura, you just turn very quickly over just to the succulent plant here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we did this succulent planter here, and it's done really well. We've got lots of succulents in it, but we're not bringing in this giant planter. There's too much there, so we're going to go and we're just going to take a few cuttings. So we've got some great portulaca in here that we grow from cuttings. We'll take a couple of cuttings of that. Snip a couple off here. It's hard to find ones that haven't initiated flower buds, but if you look back, there's one. Okay. Then we've got some Synicios here. Let's find one of these that's way back. We'll take a cutting off that. And we've got some Echeverias. Now, these are pretty small. These can be cut back or potted up on their own. But just for sake of today, we're going to take a cutting of an Echeveria and actually take that whole rosette there. With something like the portulaca, ideally, ideally with the portulaca, If you can find a cutting that hasn't initiated flower buds like this one, so much the better. Basically, we treat them just the same. Gently take off a few of those bottom leaves, but you may have to just trim them off. They don't always pull easily. Sometimes you can pinch them off. So we'll just pinch off a few of those bottom leaves. And there we go. We've got our prepared portulaca cutting. It looks just like all the others. I'm going to put a bit of rooting home on. It's thin enough. Remember, it's a succulent. It's thin enough we don't need to worry about callousing the cutting. So we'll take a little bit of rooting hormone. Find our pencil again. We're going to dibble it in. We're going to put the cutting in. But then what we're going to do, we're going to give it a tiny dribble of water, but we're essentially going to leave it dry, and we're not putting our succulent cuttings in the humidity tray. They can sit out in a slightly bright spot, just like this, until they root. As we get into bigger succulent cuttings, where we've actually cut quite a bit of the stem off, we're going to go ahead and prepare our cutting just like we've always done. This does have a lot of leaves on it, but maybe shorten our stem a little bit. Just below a note again, just like we've always been doing. Take a few more leaves off. And succulents are pretty adaptable, so we can leave some leaves on there. But what we're going to do, because this is a fairly big cut, we're going to let this sit dry until tomorrow. Then we're going to stick it. That just gives that cut a chance to dry over, and then we're going to stick it. If you get big cuts in succulents, it's not ideal to stick them directly into soil, because you run the risk of that big cut inviting in a lot of fungal problems or too much moisture, and then you run the risk of rotting the cuttings. So we've got our Echeveria head here. So this one actually has 3 heads on it. It's got some big old leaves. So what do we do with this now? Interestingly enough, you could literally do nothing with this and leave it sitting just like that. And you could likely get away with it most of the winter without ever having to pot it up. It'll start to grow all kinds of roots from the base just in the air. But we're going to try to preserve this so we can grow a bunch more, because we love these Pearl von Nürnbergs. They're wonderful Echeverias. I mean, look at the color. So we've got some big leaves here. And if we can take those big leaves off easily so they don't rip, and you can see the little leaf scar here, and the leaf is still nice and full and not mushy or anything, we're going to keep those, because we're going to get plants grow off the end of that leaf. So we'll set those aside. We'll go in here, we'll gently pop that one off the same. It's got the little half moon, it's got the little scar. That'll make some plants for us. Same with that one. Same with that one. Now we could, let's get rid of that one more big one there. We could just leave this together and root it as a multi-headed plant. We could do that. But what I'm going to do today is I'm just going to show you what to do. Look down on the stem where this rosette has come to the main stem. Gently cut it off. And then there we go. We're going to have another full rosette plant. But again, we're going to let it sit for a few days before we stick the cutting to let that callus dry over.
Lupin, come.
This side here, I think I'm going to leave this one on there. This can be a nice double-headed cutting. Again, we've got a very big cut there, so we're going to let that dry over for a few days to a week before we set it into soil, and we're just going to pop it into soil just like that, and it will root, and then we can use it again next spring, next summer outdoors. So that's the first start. This is the kind of thing you need to be thinking about now. Get out, get some of those cuttings done. Also, by doing them now, if you have a failure, you still have time to take some more cuttings or bring the plant inside and do some propagation over the winter. We got any questions today, Laura?
Paula wants to know, will these cuttings stay in the tray for the winter, in a window, or a grow light?
So if I do these under 2.5-inch pots, why I do them in 2.5-inch pots is I can then keep these coleus, for example,
Good boy.
in those 2.5-inch pots all winter. In about 2 months' time, I can probably take another cutting off each of those coleus. So that's how we manage a lot of these plants in the greenhouse to produce them for next spring, is we'll do a tray or a half a tray of 2.5-inch pots now, keep them in the 2.5-inch pots, and then take cuttings from them. You can either then move those 2.5-inch up to 4-inch as we get closer to next spring, or usually what we end up doing is we end up growing a batch of 2.5-inch, taking all the cuttings off, and then pitching those 2.5-inch because we've got good cuttings ready to root and be nice plants for spring. Whatever way you want to do it.
And Sophie wants to know, do you then bring in the mother plant? At least one? What do you do in terms of mother plant?
Well, we bring in a mother plant. We bring in a rooted plant of just about everything, unless we have a good crop of rooted cuttings. So if I took 16 cuttings of this coleus and they all rooted, all this goes in the compost. I don't need it because I know I've got 16 good plants. So it really depends how successful your cuttings are, whether you feel you need to bring in that mother plant.
When should I cut off tall flower spikes off any of my coleus plants? I want to dry them and plant them in the spring. Also,
You want to dry
it
this?
says, when should I cut off tall flower spikes off my coleus plants?
Okay.
I want to dry them and plant them in the spring. Also, can I plant the seeds directly into the ground in the spring when the soil is soft?
Okay, so you're talking about growing coleus from seed. Grab one of these guys here. This is one of the Kong series of coleus. Kong series are grown from seed. They can also be grown from cuttings, but the leaves get so big, growing them from seed is probably advisable. Now this plant's not looking too great, lost a couple of big leaves, but you can see it's going to flower. Now this has just started blooming, so it's nowhere near the seed production time. Usually we're taking these seed heads off, or the flower heads off through the season to keep foliage growth. But you can grow them from seed, and I think I just see it. Here is a flower stalk that has been on the plant for a while. I don't know if I've got seed pods yet. Doesn't quite look like it. But you just have to watch that these little flowers, on this one the flowers are exceptionally tiny, that the little flowers have turned to a pod and the pod has turned brown. At that point then, when you see a stalk like this, if these ones have turned brown, these seed pods are still green, and it's maybe even still flowering up here, take that flower stalk off, put them in a paper lunch bag, and just let them dry there. So that's what we're doing at this time of the year through the garden with a lot of perennials and things. We'll talk about it on our next show, but when you have a plant that has that long flower stalk, it'll have mature seed, it'll have ripening seed, it'll have flowers. So you sort of hedge your bets. Look at what you've got. When you see some dry, cut it, put it in a paper bag. Any other seeds that are near being mature, they will ripen. And then you got lots of seeds. Coleus, I would sow indoors, get them growing before you're thinking about putting them out. They'll germinate too late otherwise.
Sophie has a few alocasias growing in the ground. Should she dig them out now or later? And what do you recommend, storing the bulb or growing the plant on?
Alocasias, colocasias, bananas, don't do anything with them yet. September will be a great month for them, so keep them growing. We'll talk about them a little bit later into the autumn on how we manage our big tuberous plants like that and what we do with them over the winter. So we'll get to that. Leave them growing for now. All right, that's the end of our questions. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on Let's Get Growing.